Hello, everyone. Welcome back to dinanddaf. This is Elana Stein Hain. Today, we are going to talk about a concept called zet v'zet gorim, an interaction between something that is prohibited, meaning even to derive benefit from, and something that is permitted. The interaction of the two, is the result something that becomes prohibited, or is it permissible? Zet v'zet gorim. It comes up in the Gemara in Chullin on daf nun chet amud aleph, because we're talking about the child of a treifa. Child of a treifa, the mother's a treifa, the father is not. What do we say about this little babala? And Rabbi Eliezer seems to say, Zev Zegorim Aser. The fact that there is a treifa in the creation of this child makes the child problematic. And Rabbi Yeshua seems to say, nope, the fact that there is a father here who is not problematic, Zev Gorim, is mutter. But I want to go to the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, because the Gemara in Avodah Zarah is really going to give us more of the core conversation. I mean, there are a few places where we'll find in Shas, the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, we'll find in Tmura, we'll find a little bit in Psachim. The Gemara in Avodah Zarah is an extended discussion. So we have a Mishnah in Avodah Zarah Memchet Amud Bet. Let me just turn this to reading version so that people don't have to look at my top toolbar. We have a Mishnah that says, Zorin tachteh yerakot bimot hageshamim. You are allowed to plant vegetables under an Asherah tree, meaning a tree that is worshipped as idolatry, in the rainy season. Now, I'm going to say parentheses, presumably because you're not getting any, the vegetables are not getting any shade from it, right? So you're not getting anything from the tree. Aval lo bimot hachama. But you cannot do it in the sunny season, because presumably you're then getting hana, you're getting some benefit from this idolatrous tree, which is a problem, because it is shading your coat, it's shading your vegetables. Rabbi Yossi disagrees. I'm skipping a line in the Mishnah because it's talking about a different crop. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Af lo yirakot bimot hageshamim. Nope, not in rainy season either. Why? Mipnei shehaniviyah nosheret alihen v'hav lehen lezeva. Because it seems that the foliage of this Asherah tree is going to fall down, and the interaction, or it will serve as fertilizer for your vegetables that you're growing, and the interaction, or I should say, I'm put it like this: the fact that something usser is interacting with your yirakot, with your vegetables to help them grow, even though there's also something mutter, namely the nutrients from the ground that are interacting to help it grow. That gives us a situation of, sorry, zev zegorim, and it's a problem. So it seems like Tanakama, the first opinion, that didn't seem to worry about the foliage fertilizing the vegetation, thinks zev zegorim is mutar, is allowed. Whereas Rabbi Yossi, who is worried about the foliage fertilizing your vegetation, thinks zev zegorim asur. Again, the ze and the ze here, the multiple causation, one comes from the foliage serving as fertilizer, and that is something that is a prohibited substance even to derive benefit from, because it comes from a tree worshipped as idolatry. And the other ze, the other cause for the growing of your yirakot, your vegetation here, are the nutrients that are coming from the ground, which are fully mutter, not a problem at all. So the Gemara says, okay, lememra, does this mean to Rabbi Yossi savar zev zegorim aser? Rabbi Yossi, because he's worried about the aser foliage also helping the vegetation to grow, he thinks zev zegorim, multiple causation, is asur. Whereas V'Rabbanan, whereas the rabbis, or here just Tanakama, the opinion that thinks that you don't have to worry about that foliage, thinks Zev Zek Gorim mutter, that the multiple causation is still permissible. Is that what we should assume here? The reason why the Gemara is asking this as a question is because we actually have a Mishnah that seems to go in the opposite direction. Titnan, we have a Mishnah where Rabbi Yossi Omer, he says, what are you going to do with an idol if you find it? Shochek v'zoreh l'ruach l'metil hayam. You're going to grind it. You're going to throw it you're going to turn it into dust. You're going to throw it into the sea, right? And let's not try this at home, kids. We're talking about a different era and maybe a different definition of what we mean here, a different situation. But then Amrulo, others say to him, others who we might call Rabbanon, Afina Sazevel, but isn't it going to become fertilizer? So, suddenly Rabbi Yossi doesn't seem to care about Avodah Zarah fertilizing anyone's materials, along with whatever other nutrients are fertilizing them or nourishing them. And it's the other Tanaim, it's Rabbanon, who do seem to care. So, Kasha de Rabbanon ad Rabbanon, you tell me, the other people opposed to Rabbi Yossi, do they or don't they think Gorim, Zegorim, Zegorim, Zev Zegorim, excuse me, is Aser, or not? Kasha de Rabbi Yossi has Rabbi Yossi, and tell me what Rabbi Yossi thinks. So they explain it for Rabbi Yossi and say, no, this whole grinding of Avodah Zarah, it's not really going to become fertilizer. He doesn't care about that. But the bigger question is, the Gemara says, wait, do we really think that Rabbi Yossi thinks Zev Zegorim is Aser? We actually have a case where Rabbi Yossi says, Noteni Chorshel Orla, you can plant the shoot of an orla tree, meaning a tree within its first 3 years of growth. It is still asur b'hana, right? It's asur b'achila and asur b'hana. Ve'ein notin egol shel orla, but you are not allowed to plant a pre, like a nut from that tree. Why? Because it's a nut, because it's a fruit. But Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, and Rav Yehuda, in the name of Rav, says, meaning the Amora, says, Mo de Rabbi Yossi, who's a Tana, right, comes earlier, he thinks, he would agree even, that it's okay, she'im nata v'hivrich v'yorkiv mutar, that if you did a sort of grafting, where what you're doing is you're combining the orla plant with something else that's not orla, then guess what? You are now allowed to derive benefit. You don't have to consider whatever comes out of it to be also orla. You can derive benefit right away. It kind of sounds like this whole concept of being able to graft it or put it into the ground where there are nutrients from the orla tree, but also there are nutrients from the ground. So Zev Zegorim sounds like he's saying that makes it mutter, that makes it okay. And in the end, the Gemara does actually say Rabbi Yossi does think Zev Zegorim is mutter, and then it explains why in our original Mishnah that we just saw in Avodah Zarah, he would be worried about the foliage of an Asherah tree falling and fertilizing your vegetation. And it says he's actually taking on the perspective of those who are against him and saying, well, you people who think Zev Zegorim is Aser, you should be worried about even Yemot HaGeshamim, even the rainy season, because during the rainy season, the leaves are going to fall down and fertilize, and you're going to have a Zev Zegorim problem. Now, for me, Zev Zegorim is not a problem. It's totally mutter. Now, generally speaking, Halakha L'Masa, we say Zev Zegorim is mutter. But when I say that, there's a huge asterisk because there are a million qualifications, a million parameters, a million limitations. And so what I want to do is, first of all, I want to think about the logic of this notion of saying Zev Zegorim mutter. And then I want to look at some of the limitations, and some of them are very modern, come through very modern conversations. So a very accepted way of understanding why Zev Zegorim might be mutter is through the concept of bittul, nullification. In some sort of networked concept, to the same way we say a substance can get nullified, one substance can get nullified into a different substance, as long as biblically there's a majority and rabbinically it's 60-1. So too, here, the Usher part gets nullified, right? So that people say is Rashi's opinion, the Ran's opinion. Now, it's a very interesting opinion, And I understand the opinion, but it's also like it really deviates from what we think about usually as bittul, because usually bittul nullification requires at least a majority biblically, and way more than that rabbinically. So Rabbeinu David, who's 13th century Spain, says, Yesh lish'ol, I don't get it. Heyach gorim ha'heter, bevatal gorim ha'isser. Why are you assuming that it's the permissible variable that nullifies the prohibited variable? V'adrab, it's the opposite. Hayalan lumar, we could have said, shagorim shala isser yasor tamutar, right? That the prohibited item substance should cause the permissible item to be problematic. Kechol shari sur and shabbatorah, like any other case of isser that gets mixed in with heter. She'enan b'telin beheter ala barov, right? That at least biblically, you require a majority of heter, you require a majority of permissible. So he says, well, you have to actually think about this as differently than bittul, as different from bittul. Because let's think about what bittul is. Bittul is for a tarovet. It's for a mixture where you have two substances that are mixed in with each other. We're worried about the ta'am, we're worried about the taste, we're worried about the actual mamashut of it, right? There's actual concrete stuff. He says that's not really what Zev Gorim is about. He says, Vatshuva, the answer is Shalotim Zed din shal Zev Gorim, Ella b'me'ein behem ta'amo v'lo mamasho shel isser. Says you're only going to find Zev Gorim in a situation where there's no ta'am, there's no taste, there's no mamashut, there's no concrete essence of the isser in it, right? Like, think about this for a second. When you have foliage that is going to fertilize your, growing Yerakot or vegetation, the foliage is not in the vegetation, it's fertilizing the vegetation. The nutrients from the ground are not in the vegetation. They're fertilized. We're not talking about a mixture of nutrients from the ground and foliage from an Asherah tree. We're talking about they both interact with the Yerakot. They both interact with the vegetable, right? With the vegetation. And I think it's really interesting to think about because then I would put this more in the category of a concept of what my friend Levi Morrow said to me today, more in the category of like sometimes when we talk about Hilchot Shabbat, the laws of Shabbos, we say, what happens if there is a malacha, a labor that can be done by one person and it's carried out by two, right? So we say like Shnayim Shasa'uha, two people do it together. So we say they don't have to give a korban chatat, they don't have to give a sin offering, but it's still usher, it's still a problem. So I think this way of thinking about Zev Gorim, as opposed to nullification, is a little bit more in that camp, even though here Zev Gorim is mutter. It's a little bit more in that camp. But we're talking about the interaction to create a result, not a mixture of two items, as it were. Something interesting to think about. Whenever you see a concept in Chazal, what other concepts is it connected to, right? Where would you connect it? And what are the practical ramifications of that, right? Of interpreting it one way versus another. But I also want to spend some time talking about some of the histaiguyot, like some of the limitations placed on this concept of Zev Zegorim, or this principle of Zev Zegorim Mutter. And some of these qualifications actually come up in very contemporary issues like lab-grown meat. And I mean, how contemporary is this? I mean, I don't know how long this has been going on, but Scotch or whiskey that's aged in sherry casks. But first, let's look at like less contemporary. Let's look at the tour. So the tour, this is Rav Yaakov ben Asher, Rav Yaakov Balaturim. This is the precursor to the Shulchan Aruch. So the tour Shulchan Aruch says, by the way, let's make it clear. Anan kaim alan zev zegori mutter. It's true. Zev Gorim does result in something mutter, but b'di'evet, only post facto. Aber lechatchila, but anti facto, ab initio, before the fact. Asur lasot al yedei zev v'zeh gorim. You should not be trying to create things through zev v'zeh gorim. That's what he says. Umikol makom, he says, but by the way, at any rate, tanur chadash, let's say you have a brand new oven, shihisiko ba'atzei iser, and you fueled it up first, you fired it up first, like to sort of finish it off with forbidden wood, right? Let's say avodah zarah wood, right? Wood that's forbidden for hana. Says, in this case, you know what? Mutar lechatchila le'afot bo al yedei hezek sheyasikenu ba'atzei heter. Here, I would say, if you want to bake in it, bring some permitted wood and bring it in here, and then you'll have a zev gorim situation. Even though lechatchila, we say you shouldn't. Here, you can. Why? D'chashuv di'eved, because it's kind of considered like an after the fact. Why? Because actually, otherwise we would say you'd have to break it, because the fact that the way it was finished off was with this first aser bahana fuel, we'd say you have to break it. So what we're saying is, you know what? The fact that we're going to let you do it zev gorim in this situation is because it's pretty b'diavad to have to. You're actually between a rock and a hard place here, right? The hard place is we don't want you to have to destroy your oven. Aval tanur yashan, but when it comes to an old oven, meaning it's been used with eitzim that are totally mutter, the way it was finished off was that way, and it's fine. You wouldn't have to throw it out even if you used atzei iser on it. If you have a situation where she'esikom atzei iser, where you did actually fuel it up this time with wood that is aser bana, aser lefot bo lechatchila, we would say, no, you should not be baking in it by adding more fuel that's kosher fuel, right? Instead, what you should do is you just let the oven cool down and then bring more wood, right? Meaning it just costs you buying more wood, right? Like, okay, you'd have to let it cool down. But at any rate, if you already, if you go ahead and bake the bread in it after the fact, that bread is still allowed, right? So you see all the b'diavad, like what is considered b'diavad, right? The situation of a possible great loss of money is also considered b'diavad. But the basic histagut, the basic limitation or qualification is zev mutter should really only be in b'diavad situations. Now, what's considered a b'diavad situation? Then it goes on and says that. We have another histagut, another qualification or limitation, but this one is actually makes things more lenient, which is basically zev gorim as an issue only applies if the usher item is an item that is also usher bana, that you can't derive benefit from it. But if the usher item is only an item that is usher b'achila, that a Jew would not be allowed to consume, that's not even zev gorim. So lechatchila even, or I shouldn't say that's not even zev gorim. I would say it could be zev gorim, but it's lechatchila, it's allowed. And the example that the Shach gives, Siftei Kohen, no say Kalim, commentator, legal commentator on the Shulchan Aruch, the Shach gives the example of some people think that lechatchila aser liknod behema mina oved kochavim sheyanka michalav temeya. And some people think that lechatchila ab initio, given the choice, you cannot buy an animal, a kosher animal, from a non-Jew if that non-kosher animal drank, non-kosher milk, right? If that kosher animal, drank non-kosher milk, right? So that's interesting. Why? Because what are we worried about? It's a lechatchila zeh v'zeh gorim. But I'm skipping a little bit, and the Shach says, well, and by the way, they compare it to an example in the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, and it's also brought up elsewhere, of an animal that was fed, I would call it Avodah Zarah oats, right? Avodah Zarah food. So there, it's what would we say? Lechatchila, would it be a problem to buy that animal and to eat it, right? Or to use it, to eat it, whatever. Aval b'Mordechai, but in the Mordechai, who is a Rishon, um, a medieval commentator and a posek, right? He gives us some halacha l'masa. Mashma, it sounds like tafilu l'chatchila muter l'hachila dvarim asurim. Right? Not only would he say you can buy it, even l'chatchila, he thinks you can feed the animal something that is not kosher, right? So he says, how would you explain that? Venira, it seems, to Sfira Leila Mordechai, that the Mordechai thinks, Dafilu nitbatma kol yameha muteret, even if it's fed this way its whole life, it's okay. Delo dami leparasha patma b'karshinei avodat kochavim. It's really not similar to the situation in which an animal is fed avodah zarah oats. Why? Because there, in that case, the shari davka mitama de zev v'zeh gorim, it's only allowed because of the situation of zev v'zeh gorim, right? Tahatam, because there, karshinei avodah kochavim asurim b'hanal. Avodah zarah oats are also prohibited to derive benefit from. Masha'ein can be surei achila, which is not the case with just non-kosher milk if the animal suckles that. Sharei eno ochel ha'eser atzmo. Because after all, the Jew who's buying that animal is not eating the milk, right? They're not eating the milk. So another limitation, zev v'zeh gorim, sounds like zev v'zeh gorim doesn't even apply to a situation where we're talking about something that is only, quote unquote, asur b'achila, that is only prohibited in eating. It doesn't have that secondary effect that it could have an impact on whatever it is that it grows, right? That it creates, to the extent that lechatchila, a Jew shouldn't use it or make it or whatever it is, right? So that's a second. Both of these are within the realm of the lechatchila b'diavad. But now I want to look at some of the contemporary debates about zev v'zeh gorim, and let's be very careful. What I'm talking about now is not at all bottom line halachic rulings. It is literally just like one little seif, one little paragraph within a much bigger halachic discussion. Happens to be the one little paragraph where zev v'zeh gorim is discussed as a principle. And within those discussions, we see other limitations that people place on zev v'zeh gorim. So one is lab-grown meat. Let's say you have lab-grown meat. Stem cells are taken from an animal. That's like the ikar, right? That's the essence. Put in a petri dish. Other things are added. So what if that stem cell is from a non-kosher animal? What do we say? Would we say zev v'zeh gorim, and therefore it's mutter? And it's very interesting that some people want to argue zev v'zeh gorim, so it's mutter. And then other people say, well, there is something that's clearly more important than something else here, right? It's clear that the stem cells from the beginning, they're the starter. So they're much more important than whatever else you're putting in that petri dish. So do we really say zev v'zeh gorim is mutter in a situation where one of the zez is so much more essential than the other? Right? So that's an interesting limitation to try to place on it. By the way, puts it a little bit in like the world of back into the bittul nullification conversation, right? A little bit. And something similar when it comes to whiskey or scotch that's aged in sherry casks, right? Casks, excuse me, just barrels that were storing sherry. And I did find there's like one place in Spain where they're making kosher sherry, but let's assume the sherry was not, let's assume we're talking about something that was not pasteurized. It was handled by non-Jews. Is that a kosher wine? It was stored in certain casks for more than 24 hours at least, then those casks are used to age Scotch and whiskey because of, ask the vintners among us and the sommeliers among us. But they do something good for the Scotch or for the whiskey. Now, are we going to say Zev so interesting, right? The you've got the sherry that's in there, right? And you've also got whatever else that wood is imparting, right? Whatever else that cask is imparting that is making the Scotch and the whiskey age the way you want it to be. So some people suggested, oh wow, Zev mutter, good. But there are those who quote also the Shach again, Siftei Cohen. He says, well, Zev works if the mutter item, if the permitted item could have done everything on its own. They just needed more of it, right? You just needed like to have all permitted uh, wood, or you needed to have all permitted fertilizer. But in a situation here where actually, without the sherry, you couldn't have achieved the impact you're looking for, that's not where we say Zev Gorim. Or at least that's not where we say Zev Gorim is mutter, right? Very similar to the conversation about the lab-grown meat, right? If one part is so much more important than the other, or here it's if the usser part is essential, right? There was no way that the mutter part could have had the impact that you wanted on its own, right? Then maybe that's not that. Again, this is not halakha l'masa. There are those who are lenient. There are those who are not. You want halakha l'masa, go to somebody who gives you your halakha l'masa. But that said, Sefer Zagorim, it's an interesting concept. Definitely shows Chazal's creativity and in some ways I would say their legal formalism, right? Meaning because it's not just the fact that there's something usher in there, it's the fact that that's something usher didn't do everything on its own, and therefore, technically speaking, not everything becomes usher because of it. Thanks for learning with me. As always, looking forward to next time.